Let's dive right in. What Canadian actor made history on Time magazine's cover while also starring in a hit Netflix superhero series? Hint, their journey is as compelling as their roles.
I'm Leah, feeling totally excited to dive into today's topic.
And I'm Garrett, super curious about where today's conversation will take us. Welcome to Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett. All right, let's set the stage for this one. Today's topic is Elliot Page.
Let's open the book on this. I remember watching Juno in college with a couple friends in my tiny dorm lounge, one of those late nights where we should have been studying, but instead, we passed around popcorn and tried to quote along. Page's performance felt so honest that I forgot I was watching a movie. It was funny and sharp, and there was this emotional current that made everything feel true. Real talk. That was the first time I caught myself wondering how much of an actor's own perspective can change a whole film's heart.
Here's a thought I've been turning over. Elliot Page is a Canadian actor, producer, and activist who has moved across indie films, big blockbusters, television, and even video games. He uses he and they pronouns. He's a transgender man, meaning he was assigned female at birth and now identifies as a man. What stands out is how his career and his life have braided together. If you picture a tapestry, each thread is a role or a project, and the advocacy thread is woven right in with the acting, not just laid on top. From Juno to Inception to the Umbrella Academy, Page keeps showing range, and you see his activism in projects like Gaycation or the documentary There's Something in the Water. It's like art and life in conversation, you know?
Totally. And when we talk impact, it helps to define a couple of things as we go. When Page came out as a trans man in 2020, that was a huge visibility moment. Later, the Umbrella Academy wrote his character's own transition into the show, and that's rare in mainstream superhero TV. Also, a quick clarity check. Top surgery, which Page has spoken about, is chest masculinization surgery that some transmasculine people choose, and talking about it publicly helped a lot of people understand the basic vocabulary of transition. I love that Page's work and life meet in the middle. It's not just advocacy in a speech. Here's a story, here's a character, and here's a clearer window into real lives.
All right, let's roll.
Let's get to the heart of it. Hard Candy is worth pausing on for a second. It's a psychological thriller centered on a face-off, almost like a stage play on film, and Page's performance is needle-sharp. That courage to take on unsettling material showed up again in projects like The Tracy Fragments, which is experimental and fragmented in how it tells a story, and then in darker historical drama with an American crime. So by the time Juno lands with that mix of humor and emotional depth, critics already knew he could carry intense, complex roles. Juno just made it undeniable, carving out this unique space where Page was both an indie sensation and a bankable lead. That dual identity is rare. He could move between Sundance and summer blockbusters without losing that grounded presence.
Speaking of which, let's move into the middle of the story. Post-Juno, Page swings between major films and mission-driven work. Inception in 2010, with Christopher Nolan, who's a director known for cerebral blockbusters, put Page as Ariadne in this mind-bending heist, which kept his blockbuster credibility strong. There's also X-Men Days of Future Past in 2014, which brought Kitty Pryde back in a big time travel setup. Let's pivot now to activism, blending with art. Gaycation on Viceland, which he hosted with Ian Daniel, explored LGBTQ communities worldwide, and the docuseries pulled 2 Primetime Emmy nominations. There's Something in the Water, which he co-directed with Daniel, examined environmental racism, meaning communities, often marginalized, bear more pollution and toxic exposure. The film premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and later hit Netflix. You also see Page speak up on abortion rights and for human rights in places like Myanmar, where he joined an online campaign against military dictatorship. Around the Me Too era, he publicly alleged being outed at 18 by director Brett Ratner on an X-Men set. That remains an allegation in the public record, but it was a moment that connected his personal experiences to a wider industry reckoning. Meanwhile, the accolades kept spanning mediums. He picked up a BAFTA Games nomination for performance in Beyond Two Souls, which used motion capture. For anyone new to that, motion capture is where sensors record an actor's movements and expressions to animate a digital character in a game or film. That cross-medium recognition is pretty rare and, honestly, pretty cool.
Switching gears just a little to a turning point. In late 2020, Page came out as a trans man with he and they pronouns. Within a week, Netflix updated his name across all titles on its platform. That speed matters because it set a standard for how credits can be updated respectfully. In 2021, he became the first openly transgender man on Time magazine's cover, photographed by Wynn Neely, who is a transgender photographer. He spoke candidly about recovery from top surgery and about how long he had felt his identity. Then, in 2022, the Umbrella Academy wrote the character's transition into the show, and Victor Hargreaves had a quiet, grounded coming-out moment. As a viewer, that calm presentation felt like it gave space to breathe. No melodrama, just acknowledgement. For me, that's the power of representation. It normalizes without turning someone's identity into a spectacle.
Here's another angle to look at. The later chapter is about creative control and reach. Pageboy Productions launched in 2021, along with an overall deal at Universal Content Productions. Quick definition: an overall deal is basically a studio pact to develop multiple projects. An executive producer, which Page often is, oversees financing or high-level creative decisions. Under that banner, you see projects like Backspot, and he also executive produced Into My Name, a documentary with trans stories at the center. He wrote and starred in Close to You, which premiered at Toronto and picked up festival recognition, including an award at the Calgary International Film Festival. He's continued voice and animation work with Arc, the animated series, in 2024. On the writing side, Pageboy, his memoir, arrived in 2023 and debuted at #1 on the New York Times nonfiction list. That shows the level of interest in his story, and not gonna lie, that's pretty rare air. On a lighter note, he's vegan and got a cheeky PETA nod as one of their sexiest vegetarians back in 2014, and he has described himself as an atheist, which for him is about belief and fairness more than any knock on faith communities. In 2025, his company acquired rights to adapt Beyond Two Souls for television, bringing a signature game performance full circle, and he's set to reunite with Christopher Nolan in The Odyssey, slated for 2026, playing Sinon in an epic-scale project. Around that time, he also narrated a nature documentary called Second Nature, and he signed a film workers' boycott pledge aligned with human rights concerns. That's a lot of lanes, all moving at once.
We've got layers here. The recognition piece ties the arc together. Page won the Independent Spirit Award for Juno, and then years later he won a Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actor on Television for the Umbrella Academy in 2022. So across film and television, he's been honored. Add in those Emmy nominations for Gaycation and the BAFTA Games nod, and we're looking at an artist validated in multiple arenas. That's a big deal because it shows audiences and industry folks accept that storytelling can travel. Film to TV, to games, to documentaries, each one expands the reach of the message. And when he brings his real identity into a role like Victor, it's not a gimmick, it's a bridge. The result is more room for people to see themselves and more room for everyone else to understand.
Here's where we go next. Question on the table. Did the Umbrella Academy's Victor transition solely reflect Page's real-life transition? My take: I don't think it was solely because of that. Show decisions happen through a collaborative process. Writers, producers, the network, the actor. There was reporting, like a Gizmodo piece, suggesting the change was likely tied to Page's transition, but even that points to an alignment of factors. Adapting a character arc means checking continuity, tone, and audience expectations. To me, the strength of the scene suggests they did the work together. It fits the world, it fits the character, and it respects the actor. That three-part alignment is hard to do without a full-room conversation.
Let's unpack this. I hear you on collaboration, but I lean the other way a little. I think Page's personal journey was the spark that made the idea both urgent and authentic. When you have the chance to reflect an actor's real life in a way that serves the character and harms no one, that creates emotional truth. It's not just timely, it's right-sized for the story. And honestly, that brief, respectful coming out moment played like it was protecting the character's dignity while honoring the actor. So I'd say yes, Page's transition was probably the key influence. Then the writers found the best way to thread it into the show's fabric.
That's a solid point. Why would a writer's room choose that route if not for both authenticity and practicality? The character's arc needed to keep momentum with the ensemble. A huge, sensational plot turn would have derailed the season. Instead, they went with a low-drama choice that respected time and tone. So even if it wasn't solely about Page's real life, the personal piece probably guided the style of the moment. Quiet beats hit hard when they're honest.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The impact. Viewers who are trans or questioning got to see a character live through a transition without spiraling into tragedy. That's powerful. Viewers who aren't trans got a model of supportive reactions on screen. It's storytelling doing a civic good, even though it wasn't a lecture, just a scene. That's the kind of choice that keeps building representation step by step.
Speaking of pop culture, quick snapshot. Page anchors Juno as a defining indie performance of the 2000s, levels up blockbuster credentials with Inception, and then helps reframe a superhero ensemble with The Umbrella Academy. That trifecta shapes how people remember eras of film and TV. It's not just one moment, it's different chapters stamped with his name.
And the influence keeps expanding. Beyond, Two Souls brought performance capture into mainstream awareness with a BAFTA Games nomination, which validated games as an acting space. Arc, the animated series, shows he's still branching into voice work. That cross-medium presence means fans meet his work in theaters, on couches, in game chairs, and in earbuds. That's reach.
Here's a cool thought to kick off the what if. What if Page had declined Hard Candy in 2005? Without that calling card performance, I think the path to Juno might still exist, but with less steam. Directors saw in Hard Candy a willingness to go intense and precise under pressure. That's a signal. If that signal never went out, casting directors might have filed Page under promising, but not yet proven at that level. Maybe Juno still happens, but perhaps the awards wave is smaller or delayed. Or another actor gets that break, and Page takes a different indie to the finish line later.
That's something to chew on, huh? I could see a world where skipping Hard Candy nudges Page toward steadier TV arcs first, building clout the slow way. Without that early shockwave, Inception might have been a tougher sell, because Nolan's films rely on actors who can anchor complicated ideas without losing the human core. Hard Candy was kind of a proof of concept for that skill. And if the spotlight arrives later, the timing of advocacy might shift too. Gaycation and There's Something in the Water might still happen, but maybe not at the exact moment the culture was most ready to listen. Small calendar changes can alter how loud the message sounds.
Wild how that works out. In that alternate timeline, the umbrella, no pun intended, of representation might open a little later on screen. If Page's mainstream footing arrived a few years after it did in real life, maybe the Umbrella Academy still integrates Victor's transition, but season timing or tone lands differently. The splash size changes, even if the story still reaches people. And on the game side, if Beyond, Two Souls needed a lead with both film heat and indie cred, that door might have opened for someone else, then circled back to Page. The endpoint could look similar, but the road winds more.
And that's close to the heart of it. Hard Candy didn't just add a credit, it stamped a message, willing to take risks, ready to carry weight. That stamp accelerated everything. Take it away, and the momentum graph changes shape. The destination might still feature a best-selling memoir, a production company, and a reunion with Christopher Nolan on The Odyssey, but the cultural echoes along the path, the timing of representation beats, those would feel different in the room. What a twist that a single choice can bend a whole career arc. So, there's your big picture. Stay curious, keep pulling threads, and check out stories that open new doors.
All right, that ties it up nicely. Keep exploring the people who shape pop culture, and we'll catch you next time.